Hello friends! The 607th day of the war between Russia and Ukraine continues. The morning reports from the General Staff report that the Russian continues to try to encircle Avdiivka. The Russians continue to storm Avdiivka in waves, despite heavy losses, said the head of the city military administration Barabash. Shooting battles do not subside around the clock. The Russians are throwing large forces with infantry and armored vehicles. Their losses are crazy, but this does not stop them. The assaults continue. They climb like mad, that fall in dozens, and after a while they come again. There are a lot of them, said he. According to him, in recent days Russia had begun to use fewer armored vehicles due to rising humidity. Yesterday morning, Russian military telegram channels reported on a counterattack by Ukrainian troops near Avdiivka. According to them, the blow was delivered towards Pisky, to the rear of the southern flank of the semi-ring of Russian troops around Avdiivka. The Russians assume that the goal of the Ukrainian armed forces is to cut off this southern flank in order to remove the threat of encirclement of Avdiivka. Ukraine did not confirm the offensive near Avdiivka. Meanwhile, on the southern flank of Avdiivka, enemy units once again tried to expand their penetration into the defense of the Ukrainian army. The first attempt in the south of Avdiivka in the area of Buzy overpass, the second in the direction Vodyane-Siverne. In the first case, the enemy failed to achieve a result. In the second, he managed to push back the advanced units of the Ukrainian armed forces towards Opitne by 200 meters, where he occupied part of the forest belt. My friends, the robot will continue.
On the northern flank, the enemy was never able to take control of the heights at the Terikon position. His advanced units are trying to gain a foothold right in front of her between two headquarters. Of course, the Ukrainian artillery pays special attention to these attempts. In turn, even further north, in the Krasnogorivka-Stepovy direction, the enemy's advanced units have not yet managed to get further to the railway. According to Bild military analyst Julian Ropke, Russia is sending soldiers and equipment in suicide attacks on the minefields near Avdiivka. The Ukrainian armed forces near Avdiivka created powerful defensive lines with targeted positions, precision artillery, and minefields. However, the Russians continue to try to surround and take the city. Ukrainian sources report that between 1,000 and 1,300 Russian soldiers are killed daily near Avdiivka. Ropke considers these figures to be exaggerated and estimates the number to be between 200 and 300. One video from the front line shows 4 destroyed Russian tanks and an armored personnel carrier in a Ukrainian minefield. But the same number of armored vehicles are also heading there. One armored personnel carrier stops in front of a mine, but another pushes it forward, after which an explosion occurs. In total, at least 10 cars are blown up by mines in a minute in the video. In another recording, the Ukrainian armed forces bring a convoy of Russian armored vehicles closer and shoot it down with targeted fire. The only reason is that an order came from Moscow, and it must be fulfilled. For a general or officer to tell Putin that he can carry out this order, they don't care that 200 to 300 soldiers will die per square meter of territory, says Ropke. At the same time, the former advisor to the president's office, Arestovich, warns about the threatening situation near Avdiivka. Commenting on statements by Ukrainian speakers, media, and telegram channels that focus on the large losses of Russians during the offensive near Avdiivka, he recalled that Severodonetsk, Lysychansk, Bakhmut, Soledar began in the same way, after which the Ukrainian armed forces lost them. Now we are savoring the great losses of the Russians near Avdiivka. But I want to remind you that in previous times it all ended with us losing the territories that we so bravely began to defend. The threat of encirclement and loss of Avdiivka is completely real. It should not be underestimated. I'm talking about this not only me, but also many serious experts, said Arestovich. A particularly threatening situation has developed on the northern flank of Avdiivka, where the Russians are trying to cut the railway. And, although there are several more roads leading from Avdiivka, both asphalt and country roads, it was all the same near Bakhmut. We need to think about how this happens and why we have been caught in the same trap again and again. It is based on two of our installations, which are perfectly calculated by the enemy. The first is a bet on heroism, that we stand and will not give up. The second is the bet that we do not want to give up a piece of our land even for the sake of a strategic maneuver, says Arestovich. He believes that to solve these problems, Ukraine needs its own powerful defensive fortifications, just like the Russians. They, according to him, have not yet been built. In the Bakhmut sector, Ukrainian soldiers repelled all enemy attacks in the areas of Bodanivka, Hromovy, and Andriivka, the General Staff reports. The Ukrainian telegram channel Bakhmut Demon reports progress from the railway in the Andriivka area. By the way, he calls the situation in Avdiivka hell. According to him, the Russians have put everything on encircling the city. Another Ukrainian military telegram channel Deep State writes that while some of the best brigades of the defense forces are chewing out landing after landing on the southern flank of Bakhmut, the enemy has increased pressure on the northern flank in the Bodanivka-Hromovy areas and is having partial success. Ukrainian military analysts note that the focus of military operations is shifting from the south to the east. It seems that the initiative in the autumn-winter campaign will be on the enemy's side. Heavy defensive battles await us, writes the Ukrainian telegram channel Deep State. He also believes that this will be more difficult than the confrontation with the Wagner PMC last year, which was localized near Bakhmut. In addition, mobilized Russians differ from PMC recruits because they underwent training at training grounds for almost a year. At the same time, the involvement of former criminals in hostilities, even within the Russian Ministry of Defense, has dropped significantly in recent weeks. The losses suffered by the enemy are colossal, but they are not something significant on the scale of the country itself, adds Deep State. Also, the commander of the ground forces, Syrsky, said that Russian forces are suffering serious losses, but are constantly rebuilding them using reserves from Russian territory. He added that the situation on the Eastern Front remains quite difficult. At the same time, in the Kherson direction, apparently, battles have been going on for several days with groups of Ukrainian armed forces who are trying to land and hold positions on the territory captured by Russia. At least that's how the Russians describe the situation. Both military telegram channels write about this, and the Russian Ministry of Defense states. The fact that the Ukrainian army has created a bridgehead on the eastern bank was recently stated by analysts from the Institute for the Study of War, who meant the settlement of Krunki. But yesterday the Operational Command South called the data about the bridgehead false. These analysts' conclusions have not been confirmed by the military, and premature statements harm the combat work of Ukrainian defenders, said Yevhenii, head of the press center of the Southern Defense Forces. I note that in Russia, where they continue to announce attacks by the Ukrainian armed forces on the eastern bank, assessments of such actions vary. Some believe that this is preparation for a large-scale crossing of the Dnipro by the Ukrainian army. Others assess these raids as one-time actions of sabotage and reconnaissance groups with the goal of forcing the Russians to transfer reinforcements to the eastern bank from other sectors of the front. At the same time, today the Russians in their reports continue to talk about the presence of the Ukrainian army in the village of Krunki. The Russian leadership appears to be taking the situation seriously, as the intensity of attacks on the western bank of the Dnipro has increased significantly. Speaker of the Southern Defense Forces Yevhenii said yesterday that a record number of aerial bombs were recorded during the day's 36 pieces. In the Kherson region, the enemy fired 2 to 4 aerial bombs at one settlement. For a village, this is a very large power when a 500-kilogram equivalent of TNT bursts into the ground, leaving multi-meter craters, she said. Meanwhile, in the Kherson region today, they announced a forced evacuation from coastal settlements on the western bank of the Dnipro, the regional military administration reports. In 23 settlements, there will be mandatory forced evacuation. After all, the occupiers continue to mercilessly attack these villages. And there are still children left there, the regional military administration said.
Friends, considering what is happening in my country, this channel is now my only source of income. If you are able to support me financially, I will be very grateful. Thank you very much and see you in the next video.